Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb by herself. No other women, no Mary. Early, when it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away.
He didn't keep reading?
No, he didn't. He stopped right there. No.
Wait. Is that the same passage that if you keep reading, Mary shows up and says, we don't know where they laid him? And is that the same thing there?
Yeah, that's the passage there. Yeah, let me put this up here really quickly. Yeah. If you go here, it says, now the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been taken away. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and to the other disciples, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him. Now, she's not talking about herself in a royal plural. She is talking about the other women who went there. And John is just spotlighting Mary.
Yeah, guys, just think about what Sheikh Uthman just did there. If you missed it, right? He's saying, look, the other gospels talk about women showing up to the tomb, plural, women, multiple women showing up at the tomb. And then, look right there, we're reading John. It says Mary Magdalene went there. You see, it's just Mary Magdalene. Just Mary Magdalene. See, it's another contradiction. You can't trust this stuff. You can't trust the Bible. You can't trust it. Look, it says over here, it says multiple women. Here, it just says Mary Magdalene. You see, clear contradiction. If you just keep reading, when Mary leaves, she goes back and says, we don't know where they laid him. We. Plural. And by the way, what IP was just pointing out there that you can kind of focus on one part. Notice John does this throughout the Gospel of John. He tends to zero in on a specific discussion with a specific person to emphasize a particular person's reaction to something. He does it with the woman at the well. You don't have that elsewhere. He does that with Nicodemus. He does it here with Mary. This happens over and over again in the Gospel of John.
Jesus being crucified, show me the historic evidence.
Like Paula Fredrickson, they were going to say the single most solid fact about Jesus' life is his death. He was executed by the Roman prefect Pilate. Raymond Brown says most scholars accept the uniform testimony of the Gospels that Jesus died during the Judea prefecture of Pontius Pilate. You also have, for example, John Dominic Crossan, as I mentioned earlier, who says Jesus' death by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate is as sure as anything historical could ever be. Ger Ludemann says it's an indisputable fact. Bart Ehrman, in his book on Did Jesus Exist, says that Jesus died by crucifixion is almost universally attested in our sources early and late. We have traditions of Jesus' bloody execution in independent gospel sources throughout our various epistles and other writings, and certainly in Paul, everywhere in Paul, who once again is our earliest Christian writer. And of course, if you just look at the evidence, like it's mentioned in Tacitus, it's mentioned in the letter of Mara ben Serapion, it's mentioned in the Talmud, it's mentioned in Josephus and Antiquities, it's mentioned in Lucian, it's mentioned in Celsus. You have it in all of our earliest Christian writings. We have Paul talking about it. We have Paul citing an early creed talking about it. We have it throughout the Gospels where Jesus is said to die. Then we have Jesus reporting it himself over and over and over again. So the idea we don't have historical evidence, if this isn't historical evidence, I don't know what would qualify as historical evidence. What do you want, a videotape from the first century at this point?
So you have all these sources. If you were to ask Sheikh Uthman about his reason for believing something about Muhammad, so why do you believe this about Muhammad? The answer you're going to get is because it's in Sahih al-Bukhari or something like that. Sahih al-Bukhari was written 2 centuries after the time of Muhammad. So he takes it as good as gold, a source 2 centuries after the time of Muhammad. That will be his go-to source. That and Sahih Muslim, both of them 2 centuries after the time of Muhammad. And they will take these as indisputable facts about the life of Muhammad. In the meantime, we have piles of first century sources talking about the death of Jesus, and they'll just play skeptic with them. And it's just a massively flawed methodology, but you need a massively flawed methodology if you want to get to massively flawed conclusions. It's
a very weird tactic, because if they were to use that same skepticism they have on their own sources, they have to throw it all out the window. And a lot of the scholars they cite, like Paula Fredrickson or Bart Ehrman, are not going to be sympathetic to their views, as, you know, Bart Ehrman's interview with Muhammad Ajab showed, that Bart Ehrman admitting he's closer to Christianity because he thinks Jesus was crucified and all sorts of things like that. If they were to take that same skepticism and apply it to their own documents, guys, they'd have to throw them all out, because this would be like having the Gospels written in around the year 200 AD when you compare it to the Hadith collections, like around the time of Origen, or perhaps. That's how far off their collections and their biography on Muhammad are. It doesn't even compare. Meanwhile, we have Gospels being written, I argued in a recent video, before 70 AD. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke were written before then, as well as all of Paul's letters. We have far better attestation for Jesus. And yet, Muslims to die, just a basic fact that Christians celebrate all over the world and have celebrated for 2,000 years. I don't know what to do at this point. Like, if you're not interested in that as historical evidence, nothing will convince you because you have a dogma at this point, and you won't get around that dogma.
Imagine if all of the historical sources we had to go on were from the 3rd century. I don't think we'd stand up to criticism very well. That's the boat that Islam is in. Their earliest historical source on the life of Muhammad is Ibn Ishaq. They don't go to that. They believe that it's a flawed source because it didn't use the later hadith methodology. So the sources that they actually go to, Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, their top sources are from 2 centuries after the time of Muhammad. So if you went 2 centuries after the time of Jesus, you'd be into the 3rd century. Imagine if our historical information about Jesus we had to get from the 3rd century. That's the boat that they're in with Muhammad. And keep in mind, it's different. I mean, Jesus is going around. I mean, most of the time he's like, preaching along the side of the Sea of Galilee or something. You wouldn't expect a ton of historical sources talking about him. Even his crucifixion, the Romans crucified tons of people. So it's amazing that we have so many sources. According to Islam, Muhammad's going around conquering the Arabian Peninsula and challenging the Romans and challenging the Persians, and everyone's terrified of him. You go to the historical sources of the time, no one's ever heard of the guy. No one mentions him. You can't even find Mecca on the maps back then. It definitely wasn't a trade route as it is in the Muslim sources. So the point is, you have tons and tons and tons of reasons to be skeptical about the information in those later Muslim sources. You have 0 reasons to be skeptical about Jesus' death by crucifixion, and yet Muslims will be skeptical of that because of a verse in the Quran from the 7th century that they can't figure out what it means. So think about this. It's, you can't trust all those 1st century sources that you Christians have about the death of Jesus. You can't trust scholars. All you can trust is this one verse that Muslims can't figure out in the 7th century by a guy who walked out of a cave and was a caravan robber.
We also believe Adam was born without a father or mother, and we believe Eve was born without a father or mother, all miraculously by the order of God. Doesn't make any of them God.
A Christian claim that Jesus is the Son of God is not just, he didn't have a father, therefore he's the Son of God. We believe that he's the Son of God for a bunch of reasons, some of them being that he claimed it and that he's the one who rose from the dead, and so we take his claim seriously. But we always get this response from Muslims, but Adam didn't have a father either. And so does that make him Son of God or this or that? Guys, God created Adam and Eve. If you go with the standard creation account, God created Adam without a father or mother. Why? Of necessity. If there is no father and mother there, he would have to create him without a father or a mother. By the time of Jesus, husbands and wives are entirely capable of having children. Why did Jesus not have a father? We understand why Adam didn't have a father. Why did Jesus not have a father? Why did he have a miraculous birth? By the way, I think there's no answer in Islam. There's no explanation. It's just Allah knows best.
Yeah, the reason we believe Jesus is God is because he said he was God in places like Matthew 7:21, Luke 6:46, John 8:58. Gospel of Mark opens by telling us that Jesus is the divine name, Adonai, because it says that someone's going to come and prepare a way for the Lord to come. And then John the Baptist prepares a way for Jesus to come. Location, Mark is telling us, is who comes after John is the divine name, Adonai.
So now in that lineage, in Matthew, it says, and Jacob begot Joseph, the husband of Mary, to whom was born Jesus, who's called Christ. So who's the father of Joseph?
Jacob. Yeah.
So in the same Bible, in Luke, it says Jesus himself began his ministry at about 30 years of age as the supposed son of Joseph, the son of Heli. So who's the father of Joseph here?
Son of Eli.
So is it Jacob or Heli?
So this is a common argument that has been used for a long time, the idea that, the genealogies in Matthew and Luke are different, therefore the Bible is in error. And I always have to remind people tend to have 2 parents. So you have 2 genealogies. And if you read both Gospels, Matthew and Luke, Matthew is focusing on the story from Joseph's perspective. The angel shows up to Joseph in a dream, tells him about this. We don't hear from Mary's perspective. Likewise, in Luke, we hear Mary's perspective. The angel announces conception to her. We don't hear much from Joseph. What is the likely explanation? Well, if you read the recent book by Luke Vandewey, The Historical Tell, he makes the case that Luke, when he was traveling in Judea, would have gotten this information from Mary or from James, who was the son of Mary. If you're Catholic, it would have been like this, the adopted son from Joseph's prior marriage, but you get the idea. So you have that basic aspect there. The argument that Darrell Bach presents in his two-part commentary on Luke is quite easily resolves this. It's in the ancient world, especially in Judea, you needed an heir to carry on your name. If you only had daughters, you still needed an heir because it was very much about carrying on the name, carrying on the name. You see this in the Old Testament as well, especially around the Babylonian captivity. You look at some of those names in there, and you go back to Chronicles, they have different fathers because some of these men become the legal heir, like Shealtiel, I believe, is one of those names. So you have this concept of legal heir. If Mary's father, we don't know much about, didn't have any sons of his own, Joseph by default would just become his legal heir. So he could have two fathers whose name he would be carrying on. That is perfectly consistent. Right now, I only have a daughter. If she were to marry an only child, both sets of parents would consider that child they have to be the heir of both families. That's just the way you would look at that kind of thing. That's who we'd leave inheritance to. The same would apply in the ancient world, especially with the amount of death that happened in the ancient world. So it's very likely that Heli just didn't have any sons to carry on his name. Therefore, he would take his son-in-law, Joseph, as his legal heir.